Welcome to the National Flash Fiction Day New Zealand series of panel discussions. National Flash Fiction Day New Zealand takes place on June 22nd, and this series of panels is part of the international celebration. For more information about events around the country, go to nationalflash.org. The events page lists events in Auckland, Christchurch, Dunedin, Waikato, Wellington and Northland. Our panel today is about place and space and writing. I suspect since COVID changed our world, a sense of place has never been so pertinent in our writing. It is a grounding mechanism and a way to depict a certain world. Place creates atmosphere and speaks to political ideas. Each of the writers on the panel this morning have a strong sense of place in their writing and in their ideas about the world. I'm going to introduce each of the panelists in turn and ask a specific question as we go around. I'm also hoping that each writer will read a short piece of their writing as a taster, so to speak. Then later we'll open up to more general questions, followed by some time for any questions or comments that may come in via the Flash Frontier YouTube channel. So I'd like to start with Agnes Martin, who is based in Luxembourg. Agnes is a Hungarian-born poet, writer, librettist, fellow of the Royal Society of Arts in the UK, and art curator at One Hand Clapping. Recent publications include her collection Captain Fly's Bucket List and 4 chapbooks with Moria Books. She won the National Poetry Day competition in the UK, and an anthology she edited received the Saboteur Award. She has been a resident poet at the Scott Polar Research Institute at the University of Cambridge, and also in Iceland, Italy, Ireland, Serbia, Portugal, Chile, Canada, and the United States. So Agnes, you have said that participating in the Arctic Circle Art and Science Expeditionary Residency Program has been one of the most challenging and inspiring things in your life. How have you used that experience of place in your work?
I wrote a lot based on this experience. It was really sublime. And I give you just 2 examples, as there are too many. For a poem featuring sledge dogs, huskies, I collected local place names in Svalbard, all starting with the letter A, and arranged them so that they could give back the pace of the sledge ride. A short example, Adolf Bukta, Anita Vika, Alkenebbet, Angelimberget, Ardalen, Ariel Hamaren. It goes on. And of course, I asked local people to give me the right pronunciation as well, because it's important for the piece. And for a flash fiction story, it's called Man Overboard Situation. I didn't use punctuation at all because all the experience was really breathless. And in my piece, you can feel the swirl of how everybody in the artist group on the research boat just wanted to get out the shocking situation, because we really didn't know whether someone was in the water.
Thank you. That sounds amazing. Moving to Eric Kennedy next. Eric's based in Christchurch, New Zealand, and he's the author of There's No Place Like the Internet in Springtime. It was shortlisted for the Mary and Peter Biggs Award for Poetry in the 2019 OConnor New Zealand Book Awards, and he is co-editing a book of climate change poetry from Aotearoa, New Zealand and the Pacific, forthcoming from Auckland University Press in late 2021. His second book of poems will be out in 2022. His poems, stories, and criticism have been published in places like Hobart, Magdalen House, Poetry Island Review, and the TLS. Originally from New Jersey, USA, he now resides in Christchurch. So, Eric, there's sometimes a sense in your work of here and there. How do you use the sense of otherness and place in your poetry about Aotearoa? Do you find yourself being aware of weird things in the New Zealand landscape that natives might take for granted, but a standout for you coming from another country?
I think that I play to my strengths when I compare one place to another, rather than just sort of thinking about a particular place. I don't think I'm an amazing descriptive poet. Like, I don't think I describe any particular place that well, if you're allowed to describe your shortcomings. What I do think I do well is noticing the differences in like custom and ritual and history that inhere two places. One thing I will say that I always notice that I feel makes me very aware that I didn't grow up in New Zealand is when people talk about swimming in rivers. It's this thing that like people love to say you can do here. Like the rivers are so clean, you can swim in them. But I always think that it seems incredibly dangerous. And in fact, early Pākehā settlers here had a term for drowning called the New Zealand death, indicating how dangerous it was to swim in a river. So that kind of like, not mashup, but like thinking about that and then also writing from here is interesting. And I won't take too much longer. I think the other thing that I like to think about when it comes to place is history is also a place for me. A lot of what I write about is it's not there in the sense of somewhere else necessarily so much as somewhere else in time. To me, as someone who isn't from Aotearoa, New Zealand, but who has like parents from Scotland, empire and like where people were in various points in the last century and stuff like that influences what I decide to write about, what's a kind of like frame of reference. So yeah, I find myself shifting around a lot there, and I hope that I write for an audience where I live, but I'm always conscious of being someone who isn't from where I'm writing from, if that's an answer to the question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I actually live on the Waikato River or near it. And yeah, that's quite a dangerous river, but we still swim in it. Catherine McNamara is based in Italy and is Australian, grew up in Sydney, ran away to Paris to write, and ended up in Ghana running a bar. Praised by Hilary Mantel, her short story collection, The Cartography of Others, was a People's Book Prize finalist and winner of the Islands International Book Award in Greece. Pelt and Other Stories was longlisted for the Frank O'Connor Award and a Hudson Prize semi-finalist. Her most recent collection of flash short fiction, Love Stories for Hectic People, won the Saboteur Award in the short story category. Catherine is a writing coach and runs summer writing residencies in Italy, where she now lives. Catherine, in what ways might you bring an Australian eye to places such as Italy in your writing?
Well, firstly, thank you, and hello to everybody. I thought about this question, and I thought I don't really, because I left Australia when I was 21, and that's many, many decades ago, and I lived in different places for a long time. I lived in Ghana. I lived in Ghana for 10 years, and I've now been in Italy for 18 years, and I've had a long connection with Italy. But I've also lived in Somalia and Belgium, and I think that's all. But also I've moved around a lot. So as an Australian, I know that's where I grew up, and I know that's where, you know, historically that's where I come from, my family and everything, but I sort of feel like a fake Australian now. And so if I go back to Australia, I'm not really, like, I'm out of date. I'm not up to date with anything. I'm not current. I sort of feel I'm one of these people who are exiles, but not for any political reason. It's more just, you know, life drags you here and life drags you there. And so I guess that's what's happened. So, and Australia and I, with regard to Italy, first of all, Italy, I think Italy is a really hard place to write about because it's been done and done and done and done by, you know, for centuries, by European writers, by English-speaking writers, by writers from everywhere. So it's very hard to add anything to that. And so I have to say that since I've been living in Italy for the past, well, I think it's 18 years now, I've hardly written anything that's set in Italy at all. I've been sort of fishing around in my Ghana experience for probably way too long. In the last collection that's just come out, I think there's a couple of stories set in Italy, and I did write a story set in Venice, which I said I would never do, because how can anybody write about Venice? And it's actually about a couple from Melbourne who go to Venice. Don't ask me how that happened, but it just did. And I tried to sort of take a Casanova take on it. It's slightly sort of erotic, but not overly. And I think the most interesting part of Italy for me to write about, where I can sort of, you know, find some sort of authenticity, is if I write about the mountains. I'm very interested in the Dolomites. I live close to the Dolomites, so that figures in some of the stories in cartography. And I'm also really interested in migration, because having lived in West Africa, and we have so many West African people in Italy now, and it's a new thing. It's not like the UK that's been going on for decades. It's actually quite new. Kids in schools, mixed couples. I mean, that's a new thing in Italy. So I do write about that, fitting in and also not fitting in, because I think that's been part of my experience. And that's it.
Thank you. We'll come back to you soon. Vaughan Rapatahana, who is Te Atiawa, based in Mangakino, New Zealand, commutes between Hong Kong, the Philippines, and Aotearoa, New Zealand, when COVID allows. He is widely published across several genres in Māori and English, and his work has been translated into Bahasa Malaysia, Italian, French, Mandarin, and Romanian. His collection Atonement was nominated for a National Book Award in Philippines in 2016. He also won the inaugural International Proverse Poetry Prize in 2016 and was represented in Best New Zealand Poems in the following year. He participated in World Poetry Recital Night in Kuala Lumpur and Poetry International at the South Bank Centre in London in 2019. Vaughan's poem, Tahi Kupu Anake, was included in the presentation to United Nations Forum on Minority Issues in Geneva in 2019. Kia ora, Vaughan. Could you please tell us what elements of the whenua do you incorporate in your poems, and in what ways do you find language works with a sense of place?
Kia ora tātou katoa ki kone. I roto I te tauni iti o Hawara and I you know? So I'm actually in Hawara right now, though I do live in Mangakino when we're in the country. Whenua. Whenua for the panel means land in Te Reo Māori. What? So can you repeat the question, please, Tina? Can you repeat your question?
Sure. What elements of the whenua do you incorporate in your poems? And in what ways do you find language works with a sense of place?
The lands, there's probably two areas, two different elements. There's my own homeland and my own tūranga waiwai, the base, which actually is, I was born in Pātea, my marae is in Parihaka, Te Niho Aotearoa. So that's a very strong element in much of my work, and the call to come back to Taranaki to be revested, because we've got the Maunga mountain, Taranaki. Very important elements, and I know that I'm writing a lot about that aspect of the whenua, the rootedness in that area where I actually came from. Whenua in a wider sense, a lot of my work is about other countries and experiences living in those countries. Because if it wasn't for COVID, we'd be on a yearly shuffle back to Hong Kong and Philippines, where we have homes and most of our whānau live, plus many other experiences living in all sorts of places around the globe. So those aspects of land and country are very important in my poems, especially the contrasts between different areas and the contrast between different socioeconomic elements in those countries to one another. So for example, we talk about one area of Hong Kong, I might write about it and note the completely different social levels within that particular area. So yes, whenua is important when I write. As to the second part of your question, I'm not quite clear what that means. So can you, I thought about it a lot when you emailed me, and I thought, well, I don't understand that question, Tina, the second part. Can you explain that one again about the language?
Yeah, I was just wondering how, because you write a lot from a poetic sensibility, and you know, and language is very important in poetry. And I was just wondering how a sense of place might inform your choice of words or your choice of phrases. Yeah.
Well, very definitely here in Aotearoa, I write more and more my own tahirua tuatai, which is Māori. So that sense of being rooted in the country, and in particular, this part where I'm back in this week, it reinforces my wish to write in my own first language, which is Te Reo Māori, which I write more and more in. So in that sense, yes, place influences my language. When I go to other countries, or when I'm not, when I'm out of Aotearoa and look back, yeah, the sense of place influences there. So I incorporate local words, local descriptions, local locations, and use other languages there as well to try and get across that sense of place better vested in the local dialects or local languages. I hope that sort of goes towards answering your question.
Yeah, kia ora, thanks.
And one other very small aspect, I just got translated into Spanish as well just recently, because I've been invited to read at Medellin in Colombia. So it goes back to your question here about all the languages, because I sent some of my poems into Te Reo Māori, translated into English, and now they've gone from Māori to Spanish, which shows how language goes across the globe.
I know, it's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Abhayinga is based in India and is an award-winning internationally published poet, author, editor, and a British Council certified creative writing mentor. Her flash fiction has appeared in Vestal Review, Jellyfish Review, Flash Frontier, Blink Noir, Brilliant Flash Fiction, and Spark, among others. Her flash fiction was a finalist at Flash Mob 2013, an international event. Flash Bites is a collection of her flash fiction, while Many Fish to Fry is a flash novella. It is part of the flash collection at Seabourn Library at the University of Chester in the UK. She has recently curated and edited Kintsugi, an anthology of Indian flash fiction. Good morning, Abba, or rather good evening. There's a stanza in your poem, Strange Lands, that stands out for me. I have cried in strange lands and strangers have held my hands. Would you comment on that idea of finding kindness in strange lands?
Thank you so much, Tina. Yeah, I mean, this poem is actually a very short poem which I wrote. It is, I'll just read it out, in fact. It's, in Berlin I cried, my body racked with pain. I nearly died. In Boston I cried, my sister-in-law had cancer, she died. In Paris I cried, of a heart wounded and despaired, my soul died. I have cried in strange lands, and strangers have held my hands. So wherever, I mean, this is a very real poem. This is a poem which I wrote just instantly, and it is based on reality. And it is just something which came to me, as I think most poems come to poets, I feel. And it talks of the kindness of strangers, because these were very critical crisis situations. And in these situations is where I found that people do come and help you. People we tend to believe, we are cynical. We tend to believe there is no humanity left in the world. There is no kindness left in the world. People are too lost in their own worlds, don't want to help others. But I have found in all these spaces that there is kindness, and there are also strangers. I mean, as I have often said this, that people who you consider your family or who are around you may not be the people whom you relate with or relate to, and then you have these people whom you meet, whom you connect with. I mean, I have connected with people on the internet whom I connect with more than perhaps people around me, where I stay or live. So it's also how you interact and what happens to you. And my experience has always shown that there is a certain kindness, and there is in this case is associated with loss. And I was reading this Naomi Shihab Nai's poem Kindness recently, and it resonated so well with me in the sense that she talks about, before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. And it's also born from her own experience of loss. Like, they lost their passport and money, and they were stuck in some strange guy in South America where they were. He came up to them and asked them what's the matter in his language, and they tried to tell him, and then she and he said, okay, I'm sorry for your loss, I hope, in his language. And the exchange was, I am sure they didn't understand each other's language, but the exchange was such that they understood each other. And this kind of kindness is what one finds. And all I can say is that these are real kind of situations which I have learned from and I have experienced. And I totally believe that it is, to overcome things like animosity and hatred, you need to have more of this. And it is there. We are people after all. We are humans after all. And it definitely comes through every time, especially when you're experiencing loss.
Thank you. Michael Stephen is based in Auckland, New Zealand, and is the author of numerous chapbooks and the two acclaimed collections, Walking to Jutland Street, which was longlisted for the 2019 Ockham New Zealand Book Awards, and The Lifers, both published by Otago University Press. He is a previous recipient of the Creative New Zealand Todd New Writers Bursary and a finalist of the Sarah Broom Poetry Prize. Currently, he's interested in KNF no-till farming and is learning to grow his own food at Rongoa. He has just finished writing a new collection entitled Night School. Michael, I notice you often use place or environment as a way to show the subject of your poem, such as in Nielsen Street. Would you tell us about that poem and its sense of place?
Kia ora, everyone. Well, that poem is sort of like the April Sun in Cuba one for me now or something, eh? But I grew up around, panel shops and, those kind of precincts where industry happens, eh? And that sort of fired my poetic imagination, I think, from a young age, amongst all that sort of detritus and things. I found there was great beauty, I guess you'd call it, that became the world that I came into when I was a young man. Like, I left school early and went to work in that sort of those sorts of construction sites, and so that's what informs. I don't have a poem unless there's a place for the poem to happen in first, and quite often I don't know. I'm not a very productive poet. I don't write consistently, but poems are always triggered when I'm somewhere, and not necessarily that place that triggers the poem ends up in the poem. Do you know what I mean? Mm. Yeah. But that poem, Nielsen Street, those are those early visceral memories you have of a place. Like, you can smell the mold on the walls and, you know, that kind of stuff. So, yeah. I don't know if that's helpful, but that sort of stuff is deep in your psyche, yeah, and that's where your strongest poetic imagery or whatever is kind of pulled from, I guess. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming back to Agnes, you have observed the nocturnal lifestyle of bats. I love that. In the Gatineau National Park, explored the jaguar habitat in Costa Rica, and held an Arctic Circle residency in Svalbard. How do such environmental experiences feed into your work?
In many ways, for example, as for the bat residency at the Gatineau National Park, I created a poem sequence and it appears in this anthology called Battalion, published by Sidekick Books in the UK. And here I created visual poetry, just the shape you can see. And I built my own bat detector there. And yeah, I went for observations during the nights. Also, I learned how to call different owls. And yeah, this is a kind of moth, the hawk moth. So that's for visual poetry. And as for the jaguars, it was a very interesting situation because I won 2 residencies for writing the so-called Mission Jaguar, addressing mostly the necessity of building jaguar corridors. And I was ready to go. Actually, I had my suitcases and whatever, and that's when COVID came. So actually, I did a lot of research, but at home, and I used my imagination a lot, and I did write Mission Jaguar, and yeah, it was published. And now I'm hoping to go for these residencies next year. Maybe, hopefully in February. So the case might be that I write more poems for the same sequence, kind of add some more pieces, or I might write a completely different piece on a very different experience. So there might be a Mission Jaguar of research and imagination, and then there might be another one based on the expedition. So that, and I write a lot about the loss of habitat, even in that Mission Jaguar piece. And I write a lot against poaching. For example, I have a poem called Rhinoceros, and it appeared in an anthology. The income of the anthology went for a kind of movement against poaching in South Africa.
Fascinating stuff. Move on to Eric. I love how you use the sense of place in your poem, The School of Naps. Can you tell us about that poem and maybe read a few lines?
It's not too long. Should I read all of it? I can read it quickly.
Yeah,
great. Well, it's well, The School of Naps. A nap on the farm. I'll begin by saying the 2 places are the Riverina in Australia, the sort of breadbasket of Australia, New South Wales agricultural region, and suburban New Jersey, one of the less celebrated places in poetry. So the School of Naps. A nap on the farm was as common as a 2-headed sheep. This is why Meredith never learned to nap. I, on the other hand, was encouraged to dream whenever I wanted. In naps or in nap-like afternoons, I smothered in imagination. An only child is the parent of its parents, a dictator with a small bedroom. I guess they had coherence those days in the close suburban yards and modest shrubberies when I imposed my will on my impractical summary family. I've always had trouble getting things done since. I seem to be walking along a floor mounted on springs. When you're happy, you have a responsibility to those who are unhappy to do your best with it, even if it ends badly. Most of my choices are bad and good interspersed, like wearing a motorcycle helmet while riding a horse. Briefly about the poem. So before I moved to the Southern Hemisphere, which came about because of a relationship that I'm still in, on Twitter in 2009, back when Twitter wasn't a hell site, my partner, I'm in New Zealand, my partner's in New Zealand, but she's Australian. I've learned quite a lot about agricultural New South Wales because of that relationship. And when I first went there, to me, as someone from like outside New York, like wool sheds and like paddocks, it was like wild, completely wild. And it was difficult to kind of like initially understand why. I don't know, like you connect with people online through writing, through speech, etc. All the things that we do. You feel like you have tons of stuff in common. And then you see that you come from like a completely different background. To me, rural New South Wales was a very big eye-opener for like how you can like have a lot in common with someone, but also have completely different aspects of your sort of character. So essentially it's a sort of, that poem is a love poem that tries to come to grips with like how geography influences what you become.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you. Catherine, or Kat, in your story, Ellipsis Sign, you capture a sense of place very well in the interiors of the story. There is also an interesting juxtaposition between the empty farmhouse and the tiny apartment. Can you tell us about how you came to write this story?
I hadn't thought of what you pulled out when I read the question. I hadn't thought of that at all. I think, I don't know how everybody else works, but I don't really think a lot. If I've got a character and some sort of momentum and some sort of dynamic and some sort of language, I'm in. So when you talked about that, about the emptiness of the farmhouse and the smallness of the apartment, that did make me think about the elements of the story, and I hadn't thought about them at all before then. I just thought about the story and the people, and it made sort of sense, and I could see some things coming together. I think that's the best way, well, for me anyway, to work, when things happen at a subconscious level and you think you're in control, but actually you're not. There's something, there's a groundswell underneath, and you tap into that if you're in the right sort of zone. And I mean, not that this story is very long, it's all of 3 pages, but still, I guess these things are happening. And I thought, okay, the story is really about an older couple whose love has survived. And it's about a younger couple who are at the beginning of their lives as adults and at the beginning of their story their story together. And so, they still have all of the tragedies and all of the tribulations of life that before all of us, they have those ahead. And the fact that the older couple, okay, they're in Paris and they go back to they rent out the farmhouse to the younger couple go there. And the older couple, they enjoy their new sort of intimacy and rediscovery of each other in a small flat that they'd kept. I mean, it had been used as a student, for their son when he was a student, or when they had sort of separations in their marriage. But anyway, the guy, it's from the male point of view, because for some reason I like being the guy in the story. I think that's to detach from anything female and belonging to myself. He observes this tiny apartment, and I think that represents the intimacy of their mature love. He observes, details in this tiny setting, whereas the empty farmhouse is in the woods. It's in the south of France. It's where, the emptiness of their long lives, the long lives of the couple, it's about to begin. I mean, something bad is about to happen, but it's definitely where there's empty space, empty time before them.
Mm.
So I think, that's the juxtaposition. Sorry?
Would you mind reading the opening for that story?
I'll read a little bit because I think it's too long to...
Yeah.
I'll read just the first section. It's in 3 sections. And the story is actually called Love is an Infinite Victory. Okay. They decided to rent out the farmhouse to the daughter of their best friends. The young woman had been a charming, mischievous child, always twisted around her mother's legs, and had studied agriculture before moving away to Jordan to work on irrigation projects. She and her Jordanian husband were now expecting their first child. As best as they could, they removed mementos and personal artifacts from the rooms, using their son's upstairs study to store crates that were sealed just in case. Photo albums, treasured books, favorite kitchenware and artwork, along with both of their slim wardrobes, went into these wooden boxes. At first, the husband had wanted to put them in a disused shed on the property, but they decided their effects might more likely be prone to fire, damp, or theft. They handed over the keys to the slight young woman with her swollen belly just beginning to show under her dress, and the handsome man with thick waves of black hair and erudite glasses. They felt reassured in the face of such purity that their house would be looked after and loved. That's the end of the first section.
Lovely, thank you. Vaughan, looking at your poem Endgame, it seems to me that you combine a sense of place with history and politics. Would you like to talk to us about that poem?
Yeah, tēnā koe moto papa e ho. Thank you for your question. Tua wari wari aho tēnei toikupu. I'd forgotten this poem. So I went back, and fortunately I brought the book with me because I did a reading last night down here. And I found the poem and I reread it myself and I thought, yep, maybe I can read it to everyone because it's not long.
Yes, please.
It's even shorter than young Eric's. So it's called Endgame. So the river killed the fish while the rain stood by and watched, garbed in gloom like some ancient prelate etching. The sun had fallen victim to a series of cliché and just refused to shine, abrogating itself vestigial behind the runty day. Any birds left were dinosaurs, and their odd sarcastic glances merely rebooted this impasto as raw migraine. All the while you lay supine, gifting your arms to the clay in some eldritch ancestral pose. He taonga mate, heavier than the last 50 years and twice as grave. He taonga mate is Māori for a dead treasure. So yeah, going back to that poem and rereading it, it's set in the immediate future when we've screwed the environment globally. So the world is buggered. In fact, it's got to the stage, dinosaurs have returned. So it's gone right round in a cyclical pattern. And it's basically saying humanity's destroyed the world, the river killed the fish. But at the end, it's a lament, not just for lost people globally, not just for my own Māori culture, but it comes to a personal note. The person I think I'm referring to there in the end is my son, who died 16 years ago. So I think I've brought that personal note in as well. So it's political, yes, it's social, it's physical to do with the land and the destruction of it. The only living things seem to be dinosaurs again. And the whole ambiance is completely rearranged as to what humanity has experienced. That's my whakautu, ko tako whakautu. That's my answer, that's my response.
Kia ora for that.
There's a lot of threads going through it, yes.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you. Abba, I love the delicate poem of yours, Cambodian Melody, on your Facebook feed. Can you tell us how a sense of place informs that poem and perhaps read it?
Thank you, Tina. And actually, I had forgotten this poem, and I'm so happy that you brought it to my notice. You know, these things happen. You write a lot and you forget a lot, and you remember some more than others. So Cambodian Melody, I mean, it was written just after I'd come back from Cambodia, I think, within the year. And it was this particular, you know, there are moments, certain moments which stay with you of these experiences you have when you travel. So this was a particularly, it is, Cambodia is hot and humid, and it was a particularly, like, we were returning from a place called Lake Tonle Sap, which is the floating villages, and we are driving on a tuk-tuk, we're quite cramped, going back towards Siem Reap, which is the main city in Cambodia, where where the Angkor Wat and all is, where we had gone to visit, my husband and I, and my daughter was with us at that time. And this particular, I mean, so it was not a very comfortable, the road was bumpy, of course, and it was dark, getting dark, and we were just tired. And but that particular time when our guide, he was phenomenal. He was, it's one of those very resilient people who you kind of sort of like someone who's there for you. Like he'd help me if if it's too much walking, I just get exhausted. He'd sort of hold my elbow and sort of help me forward. And so, yeah, and we had a big connect with him, and he started singing in his language, and the whole atmosphere changed. He started singing, and it was dark, and you could hear and then in Cambodia again, the cicadas and the frogs, and it's a totally different. And I actually ate a frog. I mean, not frog, but cockroach. I actually ate fried cockroach because on his insistence, it wasn't that bad. I had to get over the mental. Yeah, I know, but it's always, like if you're a vegetarian, you can't understand how people eat non-veg. It's as simple as that. So, but coming back to this, so this was, and it's also about perception, because you could think of Cambodia and you can think of the extreme poverty. You can think of, the weather being bad, the Khmer Rouge and everything else, which is negative about the space. But my memory of it was actually, I think, encapsulated in this very tiny poem, which is called, the place, again, this place, and it's titled Cambodian Melody. So it sort of gives away the story right at the beginning in a way. But yeah, I'll just read it out. It's a couple of lines. He sang as the tuk-tuk rode through dust, the evening an eerie gathering of croaking frogs, above which his voice sallied forth and gently guided us towards the stars.
That's beautiful. Kia ora, thank you for that. Michael, a recent landfall review by Chris C. points out that your collection, The Lifers, deals with what some might deem tough subjects, such as crime and poverty. In what ways do you use a sense of place in certain poems, such as Leviathan? Oh, he's on mute. Michael, you're on mute.
Sorry, Leviathan.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Leviathan is a love poem, like it's a long sonnet sequence. Leviathan's a hotel in central Dunedin. It's where the Labour Party had their first meeting. I sort of had this hallucination there one night, of looking into the old yard of the Dunedin prison, which is right in the centre of, across the road from the railway. And, you know, quite often posts, I don't know, I have little things like that, and then I don't do anything with them. But yeah, then I had something to do with that, eh? So that long poem is a love poem for Dunedin and a person in Dunedin, like you say. But you know, you're writing a love poem too, or for me, when I'm writing a love poem or something, you know, that the recipient or the addressee or whatever, they're tethered to a place, eh? Like every experience or feeling that has been conjured by your connection to that person can't have happened without a place, right? So yeah. Do you want me to read one of those? It's quite a long poem, so I can't read the whole thing. But like, do you want me to read the sort of titular thing from that?
Yeah,
okay.
a few lines would be great.
Yeah, sure. I'll just grab it up for you. But yeah, that poem. I don't know that when I started writing poetry, I wrote really abstract kind of things. You know, it wasn't connected to anything. And the longer I've sort of chipped away at writing poems, yeah, place has taken over, I guess. Yeah. Sorry, I'll just bring that up. I'm having issues with my computer, and I don't have a copy of the book here. But anyway, here we go. Apologies for this.
And in a moment, I
yeah,
think.
here we go.
Oh,
Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry, Tina, what were you going to say?
No, go ahead. You're good.
So this is, you know, one of the movements from this poem, Leviathan. Halide compounds hum inside the floodlights, pouring down lumens on the prison yard across the service lane. Sleep is futile. Arctic breezes rattle loops of rusty barbed wire. Pairs of men in dark coats milled from rough wool make laps of the yard's fenced interior. I lean out the window into the brumal air of tonight's vision. The lifers carry on. They walk their fates in thick woolen jackets, addressing each other inaudibly, confessing and sanctifying their stories with hand gestures, glowing tips of cigarettes. You sleep. It is too late to show you them. Their cold cells are a museum open at 9 a.m. So I just want to go back to something that you said right at the start in reference to Chris's review of the lifers. I don't really think that there's any subject that is taboo or to paraphrase Charles Olson, too despicable to find its form in poetry with the right language. Eh? So yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you. Kia ora.
Yes.
We've got one question on the chat feed, but I just want to go quickly back. Oh, a couple more. Just want to go quickly back to Agnes, who I would love to hear read. And Agnes, I think you picked out a couple of little bits to read for us.
The piece I would like to read, or at least a part of it, is connected to Mexico, where I took part in a master class in Tepoztlan. And writing about Mexico, catching the atmosphere of Mexico, I found I wanted to write from the point of view of a dog, because wherever I went, I bumped into stray dogs, and I found it would be a very good metaphor as well. So the piece is called Pueblo Mágico, and I will read a part of it. It's quite long. In Tepoztlan, the strays rule. They gang-eye you while you pass their rubbish kingdom. Don't you feel small, an intruder? You smell like a cloud, not worth a single bark. I'm not just any dog. I work for the shaman. He rescued me. Rumor has it that he stole me from Miga, the lollipopper. Who believes this crap? The shamans often ask to spit flames or carve figurines of the Virgin of Guadalupe with a chainsaw, but he prefers slow art, drafts and doodles accompanied by chants, scumbling rough bodies. Please don't call me a thief. It's him who sends me to collect random items so he could play around with assemblages and the word would make sense. Perfect balance for 2 minutes. Then there's always something to adjust. I nicked the butcher's frayed apron, once white, with maps of countries and even continents of misery and blood. A matron's poncho, heavy with dandruff.
Thank you. Kia ora, that's lovely. Yeah, we've got a question on the chat feed. For everybody, in poetry and short fiction, we often talk about the idea of space in it. The things you leave out, the way you find rhythms and absences on the page. How do you write about a place and know what things to leave out? How do you capture the essence of a place, even if your depiction is not literal?
I guess it changes from place to place. So you get a kind of gut feeling what to focus on. And for me, it's very different, every place. What to omit.
Yeah. I also think that it just happens kind of naturally. Like you just get know the right words to use and put it there, and something doesn't work. Of course, when you're editing, you remove it. But it's basically you leave it to the reader to fill the gaps, and they do it in their own different ways.
Anyone else want to address that one?
I think it's a general question, and I think Agnes and Abba have really answered the question. It depends on what strikes you, what you carry away with you, because often you don't write about the place when you're there. It's reflective later on, and it's a comparison in the new place you're in. So you can only ever cover certain aspects that motivate or upset or concern you. You can't be descriptive of everything in that place. That's in my humble opinion.
Yeah, sure. We have another question. It's directed at Eric, but it could be applied to all of you who have moved to a new space. So I'll start with Eric. How does your experience as an American expat in New Zealand influence your writing in terms of place and space?
The very first rule of being from the US in another country is never mentioning that. And people sometimes assume that you're from somewhere else. In fact, because I've done weird things to my accent over the years, I get interesting questions like, not the most interesting accent question I've ever got was, where in Ireland are you from? To which the answer is, County New Jersey, to be sure. So I guess it's one of those things. It's just like the unspoken kind of like thing in the room. It's like nitrogen is like 80% of the atmosphere, but we never think about that. It's essential, but you don't worry about it. I suppose it informs a lot of what I do, but I almost never address Americanness in my writing, except when I occasionally take it very sort of head on. There's a bad answer to this question, but it's because the answer is that some traditions that one comes from aren't things that you kind of necessarily deal with. Maybe that's the answer. There are things that sometimes place is a thing that you're escaping rather than addressing, and that affects what you actually say about where you are.
Yeah. Good answer. Anybody else?
I just know that I haven't really ever sort of put myself out there as being an Australian writer, or I've just sort of held on to language. I mean, English language, and I've read forever. I mean, English, okay, I've read a lot of translations as well, but I mean, English American, English speaking from anywhere in the globe. And I think I've sort of identified myself more with language than with where I come from, just because I left at such an early age. And so the experiences that filtered into my work came from different places, right from the word go. I mean, from the first stories that I published. The first story I ever published, though, actually was all about welfare mums living in caravan parks along the coast of New South Wales. And it was called Elton John's Mother, because they named their kids after pop singers. But that was a very long time ago, and I was trying to be half humorous, but not really. But I think I sort of moved away from having an identity, but that's made the question of authenticity become very important for me in what I do, because I don't want to, you know, I've got to have something to hold on to, because I can't put myself out there as an Australian author or an anything author, really. So any places that I do use, I have to be accurate, and yeah, it has to be real for the reader. So that is something that I do think about a lot.
We have another question for everybody. Does a sense of place often come first as inspiration for your writing?
For me, definitely. Yeah. I quite often get poems when I'm in the car. So I spend a lot of time, probably like Vaughan, moving around the country, from Auckland to the Waikato, Tauranga, Rotorua, so around there, and yeah, things sort of hit you in the car. Or for me, like, you'll watch the way the light hits something, and boom, yeah, you've got to pull over and sort of capture that thing. Yeah.
Kate Camper, New Zealand poet, used to say when she was driving, she'd get inspiration for a poem, and she had a dictaphone in her car. On that, yeah. Anybody else on that question?
Yeah, Michael, you haven't got to Mangakino yet, mate.
Oh, I've been there a little bit, bro. I know that area, yeah. But next time I'm down those ways, I'll look you up, man.
Call in, yeah. Kia ora, bro. Kia ora. I find that actually living in Mangakino does stimulate my writing per se, not just poetry, because it's such a beautiful locale and so tranquil, and it's actually rather isolated, and it actually stimulates creative writing of all sorts, and non-fiction writing. And we've got the lake. We take our dog to the lake almost every day, even in rainfall, and it's quite epiphanic. I get epiphanies now watching the swans glide over the lake. Marvelous setting. So that's definitely a sense of place stimulating the writing. Mm-hmm. It really moves me, and I can go home and write a poem, or go down to the lake to be stimulated even more so I can write something. Yeah. The only thing that buggers it up, if you excuse the expression, is weekend tourists who come in with their bloody motorboats and go up and down the lake spewing out diesel. You don't see the swans glissade across the lake then, because they've found somewhere to hide until the tourists go back home. So there's actually that aspect as well.
And the jet skis.
Yeah, and the clowns, no, that's not a fair word, and the people in their motorbike rallies, or their vintage.
It's an honest word.
Sorry?
I said it's an honest word, eh?
It's an honest word, yeah. I could say worse words, but they're non-Mangakino residents, and they just come in with hundreds of vintage cars and big long rallies. The locals don't go near the lake on those days. So there's actually those two aspects. I guess you could write about them a bit more, but I can't be bothered. I'd rather be moved by the swans.
Here's another question for the panel. How important in your poems is the shift from a microcosm of experience of a particular place and a particular point in time to a universal reference or theme of commonality?
Yeah, I mean, any poem or any piece of flash also would be, like if you take my Strange Lands poem, it's specific to different cities and different places, but it's also addressing a very universal theme of love, humanity, kindness, and strangers, and connecting with strangers. So when we are writing, actually, I mean, when I'm writing, I don't really think so much about the poem as it just comes. But yeah, definitely, I think always we are addressing both the microcosm and the macro, the universal questions when we are writing. I think most writers do that in some form or the other.
Anybody else on that one?
Well, I was just thinking that's also the best experience as a reader, because we're all readers as well. I mean, something that involves you at a micro level, but it just takes you, it expands, or you take something away from whatever you've read, you relate, you know, with your own experience, and then it sort of lives on in your head and expands. So yeah, it's really important, I think, to give that to the reader.
And the connectedness which it creates between everybody through the writing.
Yeah. Question back to Vaughan. Does the sense of connection to the land influence a lot of your writing? Also, do you have a favorite dinosaur?
Yeah, I think I've answered this question. Do I have a favorite dinosaur? I'll get onto that. I think I've answered the question. Yeah, place really moves me. It's sort of twofold. My tūranga waiwai, or place of birth and nurturing and basic place where I come from, my roots are here in Taranaki. And we found ourselves, my wife Letitia and I, coming back here recently, like we've been called back home. I don't know why, it was nothing logical. Just one day I said, we're going to go down to New Plymouth. And we got in the car, went down and stayed there for a few days. There's something that draws you back. So I guess that first part of that question is yes, place really motivates you. And if it's your spiritual homeland, you just go back, or you need to go back. And of course, so I write poems about Taranaki, the mountain, because that's the boss down here. But otherwise, when we're traveling around, I will take out certain aspects of the place we might be in, because it could be back in our home in Pampanga. So I might write about the heat back there, or our home in Tinsoiwai, which is in Hong Kong, about the trains going everywhere. But I don't write about them straight away. I reflect, maybe travel somewhere else and look back. So yes, place is really important as a motivator, as an area of contrast. And in the Taranaki area, it's a place of confirmation of who I am, and my roots, and my ancestral roots, and my marae, te mea, te mea, te mea. My favorite dinosaur, kaore aho he mohi o tēnā eho. I don't know the answer to this. My only concern is that we don't see them come back, like I wrote about in that poem, that we can hold off for a few more years and do something about the climate and about ourselves and about our politicians.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we're just on time, but I've just got one final question for the group, and then we'll wrap it up. What flash fiction collections have inspired you?
Antwerp by Roberto Bolaño, but he would never, ever, ever call it a flash fiction. He'd probably like call it something like, you know, I don't know, something he did on an afternoon, you know, an experiment. Antwerp, a series of, you know, block shape kind. I call them prose poems or micro fictions or something. But he was a firebrand, so he was against any branding or kind of like, you know, stamp on something. But that is a really, really amazing book. Yeah, really 70 pages long or something. But those poems or stories or whatever just move. You don't know where you're going to be from one page to the next day. Yeah.
And of course, there's Flash Frontier, which is an amazing collection.
In the spirit of just recommending stuff that people wouldn't say was flash, but clearly is. All of like the last 15 years of James Tate's career, American sort of
Oh yeah, good point.
surrealist poet James Tate. Like, so I'm just like, I've been going through the James Tate back catalog, Memoir of the Hawk, The Government Lake, and probably this is the one I would recommend the most.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Hey, that book.
Yeah, you don't get lots of books of poems that are like 200 pages.
Yeah.
And if you do, generally you're like, wow, that's way too long.
Yeah,
but with James Tate, you're grateful for every page.
Yeah.
So to me, James Tate is my sort of like narrative, but smuggled in through poetry hero.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I actually read lots of Flash because I work as editor for Litro, and I can think of individual authors. Collections, I really like Tanya Hirschman's work. She's an English writer. And Ken Elks as well. He's put out a really good collection. And I don't remember the name of it, I'm very sorry. But both of those books are really good reads for me. And you know, they're books that I refer to when I teach, and they're books I read more than once.
And in fact, Tanya and Ken are joining in with another panel with the National Flash Fiction Day video panel.
Cool.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, they're
yeah. Well, that's fabulous. Sorry, one more.
I recommend Angela Redman for the freshness of the language and her inventions. Excellent read.
I read a lot of Flash, and it's more author-oriented rather than collection-oriented. So yeah, and more of you know, I'm focusing a lot on Indian writers or writers with an Asian background, but who are also living outside. A lot of them write Flash. Like there's Tara Isabel and there's Sarah Siddiqui, and who I've read recently. And also, of course, I read a lot of journals like Smoke Long. Smoke Long has been my favorite for ages and ages and ages. So yeah, I read a lot of stuff there. And basically, I think it's more the right, you know, how I think it's to do with relationships, I think, and which sort of propels me to read a particular work, or how the opening line is. And there are a few select writers like that. And then poets like Mary Oliver and David White, poets like that, who really sort of I turn to when I want to read something like poetry. But collections per se, no. I mean, I read a lot on the net. I read a lot of authors. So, yeah.
That's fabulous. Well, I think that's about it for us. And I'd like to thank the viewers who have joined us and for the questions that have been sent in. And of course, a special big thank you to all of our wonderful panelists today. It's been an inspiring panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
It was lovely to